Hello and welcome to the Federal. We have with us Dr. Trilochan Sastry, professor at IIM-Bangalore and founding member of Association of Democratic Reforms or ADR. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Sastry. Sir, my first
Thank
question
you.
to you is the Supreme Court today struck down the electoral bonds and has called it unconstitutional and arbitrary. Can you explain the significance of this verdict?
Yes, yes. You see, the fundamental basis of any democracy is transparency in all dimensions, particularly in funding, because the political parties they fight elections based on money, and that funding comes from political parties. And that funding needs to be transparent because voters need to know who is funding the political parties. Is it a legitimate organization? Is it black money? Is it some scam ridden corporate? Who is funding this political party? I must know before I vote. So the electoral bond scheme had been introduced to make that non transparent or opaque, which means, in short, that public would not know who is funding the political parties. It would be hidden. What the Supreme Court has done today, based on a petition that we filed from ADR and some other organizations around the country, what the Supreme Court has done, it has struck down this electoral bond scheme and said it is violative of Article 19 of the Constitution. So the Constitution gives us some fundamental rights, and one of the fundamental rights the Constitution gives us is the right to information, which means that a voter has the right to know whom he is voting for and how much that party is getting funded. So the Supreme Court has merely restored a fundamental right. So that is the significance.
Sir, true. Sir, since the 2024 general elections are just 3 or 4 months away, do you think this decision will impact the election process or maybe the way the elections
Not,
are coming?
I don't think so in a substantial way. What will happen is that the money that was given without transparency will now be given fully transparent because electoral bonds are only 6, 7 years. Before that, also funding was coming to political parties. So that same system has now been restored. So the public will know who is funding whom if they want to find out.
Sir, the
Yeah.
Supreme Court has also talked about quid pro quo between companies, corporates, and political parties. What is
Yeah.
the extent of the involvement? Can you explain this to our viewers?
No, we can talk about the principles and what happens. The extent is unknown. Maybe nobody knows it because it requires a lot of research and data to find out. So the basic idea is the Supreme Court has said in its judgment, which was released today, that corporates are not giving money to political parties only for income tax benefits. They are giving for quid pro quo, which means that they will first try to fund the political process in such a way that parties that they favor will win. And secondly, whichever party wins, they will try to get the laws and policies and schemes and so many things that the government passes from time to time that will benefit that company. Now, should the government be working for the benefit of a company or the persons who are funding them, or should the government be working for the benefit of the people of this country? So that is the problem, and that is why the Supreme Court has said it is violative of the provisions of the of democracy.
So, do you think this judgment of Supreme Court is a step forward towards state funding of polls? A lot of organizations are demanding that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that remains to be seen, but it's in a positive direction. This judgment, definitely, we welcome it wholeheartedly. We are so happy that the Supreme Court has upheld the foundations of democracy and transparency. Whether it will lead to public funding of elections remains to be seen. we must understand very clearly that the political system is what it is. We need a political system, we need political parties for a democracy. What has happened over time is that political parties are only interested in winning elections. They try to keep within the law, but they do whatever is possible to win elections. Now, when they do whatever is possible, public interest may take a backseat. Funding may become very important. And this whole issue of public funding has to be done through a bill passed by the political parties. Whether they have reached that level of maturity and consensus that this is actually good for democracy, we don't know. Maybe they are pretty happy with the current system and they don't want all this public funding and this, because public funding may mean that corporate funding should be stopped or some other curbs will be put, and new entrants can come into the political party and disturb the existing system. So they are not very much interested in public funding. But who knows? Maybe some leader, far-sighted leader, some statesman like leader may emerge who will do that.
So now that the Supreme Court
But
has
in the
scrapped the
immediate future, I don't see any possibility.
okay. So now that the Supreme Court has scrapped the electoral bonds,
Sorry?
what now that the Supreme Court has scrapped the electoral bonds, what is the next step forward for the union government? Do you think an ordinance or some kind of a measure will be brought in to favor it?
I don't know. You have to ask the union government. We cannot speak on behalf of the union government. What they do, they alone know.
True, true. So, do you think there is a need to change the poll spending per candidate in the elections and make it more realistic? How can we ensure that the limit may not be possible?
Ensure,
Uh,
limit the number of people standing for elections.
no, no, sir. The amount per candidate.
What is your question?
Sir, the amount that a
See,
candidate
let
can
us
spend.
correct. So I think we need to understand very clearly what these amounts are and who sets them up and for what purpose and through what process. These limits are set by the election commission after consulting the political parties. From time to time, these limits are revised. Mostly, they're revised upwards. So, for example, I think in Lok Sabha it is 70 lakhs, and in the assembly it may be a little less, 40 lakhs or whatever. So these limits are set by the election commission, officially notified after consulting political parties. Now, political parties complain that these limits are unrealistic, but they themselves suggested it. On top of that, we in ADR and other organizations, we track the electoral expenses. So every candidate is required to file with the election commission how much money they have spent in the elections. Our data show clearly that for about 4,000 or 5,000 winners or all the candidates put together, we have some 70, 80,000 candidates. We can only recall a handful of candidates who have said they have exceeded the limit. Most of them say that they have spent less than 50% of the limit. So officially, they are declaring that they have spent less than the limit. In another way, they say that these limits are unrealistic. In the third way, they themselves have proposed these limits to the election commission. So what, this Bahurupia, they're speaking in different voices, the political parties. So I don't give any weightage to all these things. Now, the reason for putting these limits is a level playing field, in the sense that somebody who is very rich or very powerful can use that money to win elections at the expense of somebody else, which is not they are sticking to. In reality, everybody knows, as they say in India, bacha bacha janta hai, that these limits are exceeded very handsomely by nearly all the candidates of all the political parties.
It was a pleasure talking to you, Dr. Shastri. Thank you.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.